the webinar literally the moment I was meant to be starting, so sorry about the late start. But hi anyway, good morning or good afternoon to you, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and I hope you find it constructive and useful in your own businesses. So we're going to have you on the line, I think, for about 35-40 minutes, I think, to get through the slide deck, and then we've got some time at the end for questions. And as Heather just said, you can pop them into the chat box, and then we will do our best to at least attempt to answer all of the questions at the end. So this is actually our 8th salary guide, which is hard to believe, which is useful for us because it gives us lots of data that we can compare over the years. This year we had 3,500 people took the survey, pretty much the same number as we've had the last few years. The report covers 12 different industries, the different geographic regions across the country, different functional areas within organizations. So I think there's insights for virtually all organizations. And in the report itself, you'll find actual salary levels for many different roles, different levels of experience, working for different sized organizations, as well as our analysis and recommendations based on the job market that we're seeing right now. But for today and today's webinar and over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to kind of cover two key areas. The first one is the key findings from the survey regarding economic outlook, strength of the job market, and how all of this will affect compensation and benefits plans. And secondly, we've picked out 5 key areas where we see there being a mismatch between what employers are offering this year compared to what individuals or employees are actually looking for. So we're going to highlight those 5 things. We've got some ideas for perhaps how you could respond to that. So I'll start out with the key findings, obviously. So we'll kick off with good news here. This year we saw a big uplift in economic confidence. The chart here shows expectations for the economy. The dark blue line is the proportion of people who said that the economy is going to strengthen in the year to come. And you can see quite a lot of movement there over the last couple of years. There was a big drop after the 2014 oil and gas downturn, where the proportion of people who were optimistic was almost the same as the grey line, which represents people saying the economy would weaken, and that was kind of a bad patch for the Canadian economy. But in the last 3 years, we've seen steady improvement, and this year, I'm happy to say that there's more people saying the economy will strengthen than are saying it will stay the same, which is great. And I think once it crosses over like that, usually there are good things ahead. And then looking at how everyone is feeling about business activity from a personal perspective, you know, how's my organization getting on? 60% of employers say that business activity increased in 2017, and that was up from 51% said that in 2016, so good improvement there. And then looking ahead, 70% say that activity will increase again next year, which is great to see. So Canadian employers are optimistic, things are looking up, but what does that mean for hiring? So I'll start out with permanent hiring. This chart shows percentage of employers who have increased permanent headcount. The light blue represents what employers said they were planning on doing for that particular year, and then dark blue is what actually happened. So you can see two things here, like how many companies are increasing permanent headcount is one thing, but also how close they are to what they expected to happen is another thing. So most of the employers, I'd say, are pretty close for each year, generally speaking, maybe a little bit below, but this year's headcount increases actually slightly outpaced expectations, which I think is a sign of how busy employers were during this calendar year. And then next year's prediction is higher again. It's the highest that we would have seen since 2013. So employers are absolutely planning for growth. But the really interesting story here this year is about contingent workers or temporary and contract staffing. Again, in light blue is what employers said they were planning to do for that particular year. The dark blue is what they actually did. In 2017, you can see that the contingent staffing levels, you know, percentage of companies that plan to increase contingent staffing levels Turned out that it was actually more than double the expectation. Now that's an amazing jump. We didn't expect it to be that high, but it does tell me that people didn't really realize or appreciate how busy they were going to be, or the kind of people resource that they were going to need to match up with their business needs. So bringing in temps or contractors obviously is a great way of responding to sudden increases, but it still allows you the flexibility to shrink in size without having to deal with difficult cutting of permanent staff. Having said that, temp and contracting doesn't come without some cautions. There seems to be added regulations around the use of temporary and contract workers all of the time. Right now, it's happening in Ontario with Bill 148. So I would say if you do have a temporary contract population, you've got to have the right processes in place to be able to keep visibility around your use of temps. We do a lot of workforce assessments for our clients, and you'd be amazed at how sometimes temporary or contract workers are categorized where there's no visibility on them. We found temps and contractors at clients listed as office supplies and budgets, amazingly. We've had HR departments tell us an estimate for the number of temps that they have on site, and then you look around and find out that it's like 3 times that. But either way, temps and contractors are a very useful resource. You just need to know where they are, how many you have, and under what terms, most importantly, you've got them working for you. Next year, another 26% of employers say that they will increase contingent staffing levels, which would be 2 big increases in a row. So, and I should have said, if we can help you do a workforce assessment, we'd be very happy to, so just let us know. Okay, so far business activity is up, confidence in the economy is up, hiring activity is up and is planned to continue or accelerate into 2018. So what does this mean and what effect will it have on salaries? Well, salaries are moving, but I would say they're moving slowly. So if you look at this chart, this is the total number or the total proportion of employers increasing salaries each year, and the dark blue bar represents the proportion increasing salaries by less than 3%, and in light blue, those increasing by more than 3%. So looking at that trend line that I've just added, since 2012, the proportion of employers increasing salaries by more than 3% has dropped by half, and you've got a corresponding increase in the proportion of employers offering less than 3%. And we think that 3% mark really is kind of a watershed level. When companies are feeling very confident about the future, they start moving towards an over 3% increase. When they're still feeling some degree of caution or wanting to be conservative, if they are going to offer an increase, it's going to be less than 3%. So despite the fact that there's confidence in the economy, business activity, yes, we're going to hire more people, it is not translating yet into any more aggressive, if anything, a less aggressive approach to salary levels, which is interesting. In any event, the trend is towards more and more conservative approach, and 2018 would appear to be no different, really. However, that trend, we believe, is starting to cause some pressure in the job market. So a couple of stats here for you to think about. So this year, 41% of employees say that they think that their salary is below market average. Now you could say, well, everybody thinks that they're not paid enough and they should be paid more, me included. But when you look at the statistic, we asked that same question the year before. It was 32% of employees saying that their salary was below market average. So that's a very significant jump in 1 year. 40% of managers say that they have increased the salary offer to secure a specific individual. HR is worrying a little bit about salary too. They told us that the biggest competition for talent comes from companies that can pay more, and they're responding to that issue. You might say, well, that's not that surprising, but here is an interesting statistic. 41% of HR leaders say they've either already changed compensation plans or plan to change compensation plans specifically to attract talent to the organization. Now that number was only 25% last year, so another major shift. So if you think of all of the information that we have on the slide right now, you end up with a kind of a two-speed approach when it comes to compensation that sounds something a little bit like we're taking a very conservative approach to retaining our existing staff, so we're going to give them less than 3% increases, but we're taking an increasingly aggressive approach to attracting talent, and we will break our own salary levels to get the right person. Now, when you add in the piece at the top, the 41% of people saying that they feel that their salary is below market rate, you've got the makings of a potential problem, I think, in 2018, and that is there's little more upsetting to an employee than when a new person joins that comes in at the same level or a similar level, but they're on a higher salary. And unfortunately, no matter what you do, that piece of information always seems to get out. So I believe that the conservative approach internally, but bringing people in from outside and breaking the salary levels that you've already set in your organization, is not a sustainable position, especially given that people are starting to feel a little bit dissatisfied. Okay, so the last few years we didn't really talk about the skills shortage as much as before, but it really feels like it's back on the agenda. So for the first time since 2014, when we started asking this question, we've seen a significant increase in the number of employers saying that their industry had a skill shortage. So for the past few years, that number has hovered around 65, 66, maybe 67%. But this year, there was a significant jump, and it's jumped up to 72% saying that. And the skill shortage is negatively affecting companies. 58% of employers say the skill shortage is negatively affecting productivity. So more than half of companies feeling like they can't get things done, maybe can't get things done as effectively as they'd like because they don't have the skills or resources that they would like to have. And finally, a very significant number, 71%, say that the skill shortage is negatively affecting employee stress and work pressure. So employees are stressed out, feeling pressurized because they and their teams are having to maintain or increase productivity and output levels, perhaps without the amount of resource or without the specific skills that they need. So what's kind of driving the skills shortage? So we ask this question every year for the last few years, and this is what we've got this year. So we've got the 5 biggest contributors towards it, and we've also added whether more or less people are citing this reason compared to last year. So the number one reason, there was number one reason last year, still is this year, 28% of people saying that a lack of training and development was the biggest contributor to the skills shortage. But the number or proportion of people saying that that was the biggest contributor has actually dropped. Then we've got fewer people entering the job market. That came in at second place, but again, that has dropped, fewer people saying that. The number of employers saying that the main reason for the skills shortage was people leaving to join another industry, that increased, and so did retirement. The final option that we offered was people relocating to other regions, which also decreased. So what I'm going to do is just have a look at the 2 areas where we saw significant increases. People leaving the industry, that jumped from being chosen by 16% of people who responded to the survey up to 21%. That's a 31% increase from last year to this year, if you follow what I mean. The main industry is saying that that's what they were seeing as a big issue for them were companies that are working in retail, hospitality, and manufacturing. The first 2, retail and hospitality, can be seen, I suppose, for at least some roles within that industry as somewhere that people might work for a while and then they might move on and go and work somewhere else. So maybe not that surprising that you see people leaving those industries, particularly when there's a lot more options and choices for people to take. And then secondly, manufacturing. Well, we know manufacturing is continuing to struggle a little bit to attract specifically younger people, really, who I would say sometimes, and unfairly so, I think, at times, that manufacturing isn't as interesting or attractive or maybe as trendy as some other industries. And then the other one to focus on here was the jump in retirement. So 16% of employers citing the retirement as the key contributor to the skills shortage. The reason we're highlighting that as significant is it's moved up from 12% the previous year, so that's a 27% increase. And we've talked about the upcoming retirement boom for the last 2 years, but this is the first time that we've seen a higher proportion of people saying this is now contributing to the skills shortage. So it is interesting. Maybe we were at a bit of a tipping point there. But anyway, all of these causes are leading to one issue, which is more and more pressure on attracting and retaining people. So 78% of managers say that they're currently experiencing moderate to extreme difficulties hiring. And at the end of the day, hiring is all about trying to attract new people to the organization. And that comes down to what are people actually looking for. So from our research into what candidates are looking for, we know that at any one time, somewhere in the region of probably 10 to low teens, 13% was the result that we got, of any people in an organization are actively job hunting. So if you look around your office today, you can probably safely assume that around 10 to maybe even 15% of people in the office are currently looking for a new job. Now, that didn't sound that surprising to us. It's consistently that number, actually. But according to this survey, 90% of people said that they would be open to considering the right offer. You know, if the ideal job came along, would they be open to look at it? And most people would generally say that they are open to that. The reason it's significant is, again, this was increased from 78% back in 2013 to now 90% of people saying that they would be open to the right offer. And this is really all about confidence in the job market. Candidates are feeling a lot more confident about the job market of late. You know, if you've seen friends or probably colleagues move job recently and it's all worked out well for them, or even if it hasn't, and then they just look and they found another opportunity and the second opportunity works out well, you know, you start to think, well, maybe I could move. And the fear of moving job, which you typically see in an uncertain job market, that is gone. You know, we believe that right now there's a very high degree of confidence in the job market and people are not scared of moving. So a couple of key points to make here. Number one, if you're just relying on applications to your job postings, you're really missing out on most people who potentially could be interested in your job. You're focusing on the 13%, you could be focusing on the 90%. If you can put the right offer in front of somebody, there is a chance that they could actually accept it. So you've got to start thinking about, how can I find and engage with the target audience? So when you do have an open position, you're not just relying on the people who applied for the job from the job boards. And then secondly, and kind of on the flip side of that same coin, if you're not actively focusing on retention, then your top employees or your key people could be open to an offer from a competitor. Actually, I would say 90% of them are probably open to an offer from a competitor, and that's quite a scary thought for any employer, us included. But that requires that you know what people want. So we, as I mentioned, we've surveyed thousands of candidates, and we've asked them what keeps them in a job, what attracts them to a new role. And something that we're doing this year with the salary guide webinar, today's presentation, is looking at the mismatches between what works to attract and retain employees and what employers are actually doing, and is there a mismatch between those two things. So first of all, I look at some top kind of headline findings about what's important to employees, and then look at some of the gaps or the missteps that I think employers could be making and what perhaps you could do instead. So I look at priorities of candidates and clients. So the top graphic here, or the first graphic that we can see, is how candidates weight different elements when they're considering a new job offer. So for example, they would say 40% of the decision is based upon salary. Actually, I should explain that. It's going to pop up in a second. Here, I'll give you that piece of the slide. It's easier to see. So 40% would 40% of the decision is based on salary. 21% is based on career growth. 20.3% based on their feeling towards company culture, and then 18.4% of the decision, very precise, is based upon, well, what benefits am I going to get? But and below that, the second graph, I'm showing how employees weight the importance of different elements of their current job when they're thinking about their own satisfaction levels. And if you compare the two, you can see that salary becomes less important when it comes to retention. Still very, very important, 38% of the decision, but it becomes less important when it comes to retention, while career growth and company culture become more important. I think the most important takeaway from these charts is that while salary is the single biggest factor for both attraction and retention, you can't get away from that, it's outweighed by career growth and company culture, an important thing to remember. Second interesting finding from this information was that Canadians are more likely to say that they would take a pay cut for their ideal job than say they would take a step down in seniority. So I will take a pay cut to get the right job, but I'm not going to take a downward step in my level of seniority, which shows how important career progression is to people. You might have already spotted some mismatches between what you thought people wanted and what these results are showing, but I'll just go into it in a little bit more detail and kind of draw them out. So I'm going to go through 5 specific areas, as I mentioned at the start, where I see you could be an area of opportunity for you to make an improvement or a change. You might be knocking it out of the park on some of these things that I go through, but I'm sure there might be others that you could see it as an opportunity to make an improvement. And as I mentioned a few slides back, there is pressure building around salaries. So salaries is the one I'm going to start with. Companies are being cautious on increases, but individuals are feeling confident about the job market, and they will move to get the salary increase that they feel that they deserve. Also, companies, as we've illustrated here, companies are willing to pay that extra amount to be able to get that individual into the organization. And I personally think a lot of companies are going to be surprised by the effect that this dynamic is going to have on their own ability to hold on to important members of staff as we go through 2018. But in any event, it is important that you're meeting market expectations. You have to be at least competitive. You don't have to pay the most, but you do have to be competitive. So how can you do that? Well, first of all, sorry, I went wrong. What's happening there? There we go. Sorry about that. So how can you do that? Well, first of all, you can use your resources to make sure that you know what the market rate is. Like, you can look at our salary guide, talk to one of our recruitment consultants, or you can work with one of the associations that you may be a member of, or another expert to find out what's actually happening. But it is very advisable to go outside and try and get information. Knowledge is really half the battle, and if you find that some salaries are below market rate, you just need to put a plan into place to increase them. It doesn't mean that you have to make the complete change immediately, or that you increase the salaries all the way to the level that you feel you need to. But having a plan in place to be able to increase them over time is what's important. And once you do decide on what the plan is to do that, I would suggest explaining that to your team or explaining to the people that it's going to affect, so that at least that they know that you've gathered the information and you're taking action and not ignoring it. Next, review the salary bands as positions become open. So what I mean by this is to say, if the job is a role that it's been a few years since you filled it, it's very advisable to review the salary of that new role when it comes to the second time round. Perhaps the salary that you were offering 2, 3, 4 years ago is still appropriate. Maybe it's too little, and perhaps that salary level is increased, but it's a good idea to review that every time a job needs to be filled. And then finally, as I kind of mentioned at the start, don't compete on salary alone, because there's only one company can actually pay the most for any particular skill set or in any industry, and it's really other factors that are going to set your company apart, but you still do need to be competitive. So looking at benefits next, I think there's a lot of opportunity here. So let's look at what employers think matters most for recruitment and retention. So we asked HR professionals and managers to rate the benefits they thought were most important to recruitment and retention, and here are the top 5. So we've got flexible work hours, ability to work from home, pension/RRSP matching, financial support for training, and then time off in lieu. And I believe that they were in order of importance. So these might look pretty good to you, and we do hear a lot about flexible working hours and so on, but it might surprise you to know that only one of these is actually in the top 5 for what candidates say that they want the most and feel would be the most attractive or the most influential and to stay or to go. And only 3 of the ones on the left actually appear in candidates' top 10. So what are candidates saying that they want? Well, here's the top 5 from a candidate's perspective, and for them it's all about really personal or professional development. So if I highlight those 3 of the top 5 are training related, to compare to just 1 of the top 5 for employers. And we did use the same list. So the HR managers or hiring managers had as many training related options on their list. They just didn't think maybe that they were as important or as influential I should say. Pension and RRSP matching was in the candidates' top 10, and time off in lieu was in the top 10 as well. But it looks like very few candidates are getting or feel like they're getting the training and development or investment in them that they want. Flexible work or work from home options aren't enough to outweigh really that need for feeling like I'm developing and progressing, I'm learning new things. That's way more important. So before we leave this slide, I'm sure that you've noticed that health, dental and extra vacation aren't on the lists above, or maybe you haven't, but more than 2/3 of employers offer these benefits. So really at this stage, they're table stakes. They're not a differentiator in the market. The only way they could be would be if you weren't actually offering them, and you probably don't want to be differentiated in that way. And then the final note I'll say about benefits, when we surveyed candidates, people who work in HR reported receiving the most benefits. Now, I don't actually think that that's because HR people get preferential treatment and get better benefits than other functions, or benefits that other functions just don't receive. But what I do think it shows is that a lot of people don't actually know what benefits they get, and maybe they don't know what's available, but the HR department does because, well, it's their business to know. So I would say just ask yourself, do your employees actually know what is available to them? Are they aware of the professional development programs and other benefits they receive? Because if you're not telling them about them, or if they're underutilized, then it's really a lost opportunity as a retention tool. Okay, so what can you do to better align with market expectations? So 3 key things. My first stop would be to talk to your employees. What do they actually want? A simple survey could be created, sent out company-wide, and that might help you get insights that you need. So you can prioritize the areas where there's the most appetite, or maybe the greatest degree of dissatisfaction if it's turned into a frustrating thing. And then you can say, all right, we're going to make that change, and that will have the biggest impact. Secondly, I'd suggest using all of your resources to determine market expectations and candidate priorities. Like our salary guide is a good starting point. As I said, talking to recruitment consultants. We talk to hundreds of candidates each every year across industries and functions that would be connected to your business. So they will have good information. And then finally, when you are making changes, try and prioritize those most wanted benefits first. Like making a big deal about introducing, I don't know, free lunch or snacks. I'm not saying people would do that, but focusing on things that might sound cool may not actually check the box. So find out what your employees want, prioritize those things into your plan, that would have the biggest effect. Okay, as I said, 90% of people would leave their current opportunity for the right job offer, even those, like even if you're currently happy in your current role. So what would actually make a happy employee accept an offer? Well, the number one reason that a happy employee would consider a job offer is for career progression, and it's the second most important aspect of weighing a job, and it's the biggest pull factor. And when I say a pull factor, what I mean is the biggest factor you have as an employer to try and bring in a candidate that perhaps wasn't actively job hunting until they heard about your opportunity. But only 42% of employers promote career progression to attract top talent. Now 42%, actually you could say, well, that's quite a good proportion of people who are using career progression to attract top talent. But it's actually one of, I think it was the last or second least used items listed to attract talent. So if you're not telling candidates about career opportunity, career potential, career growth, then they probably will not be interested in your job. The second mismatch I see is what employers think career growth actually means compared to what employees are looking for. So this is the top 5 factors that contribute to the feeling of career growth according to individuals, people or employees. And they listed them as: number 1, my relationship with my boss; number 2, training courses that I go on; number 3, internal job opportunities that are available to me; 4, internal recognition; and 5, the project or the kinds of projects that you get to work on. So some of these might fit what you thought the people wanted, such as like training courses and internal job opportunities, but actually a lot of candidates are looking for recognition, variety in the projects that they work on, and of course, top of the list, a good relationship with their boss is seen as absolutely key for career growth, which makes sense. You know, if the boss believes in them and promotes, not gives them a promotion, but promotes them internally, say this is a good guy, that really makes the person feel like I'm in the right place and my career is progressing. So just think about whether you're supporting people across all of those areas when you think about career growth. It's not just about job titles and promotions. Increasing responsibility, learning new skills, internal recognition, they're the things that contribute to someone feeling like their career is moving forward. So when you're trying to attract target candidates, I would say emphasize career opportunities. It's really the main reason ambitious people leave their jobs. Secondly, I think a lot of employers are put off by the idea of career growth because they think it's really about promotions or salary increases, and they could say, well, there is no promotion available and I can't afford a salary increase right now. But our advice, is to think beyond that. You know, that's not what a lot of people are actually looking for when they talk about progression. Most people, like I said, are looking for opportunities to learn new things, be challenged, increase their responsibility. And to that end, there's lots of things that you can do that don't cost anything. Setting up mentorship programs internally, doing job shadowing, organizing lunch and learns where you have more experienced people passing on their knowledge or experience to slightly more junior people. Setting up things like that, all of these ideas like mentorship, job shadowing, lunch and learns, there's 2 great benefits to them. Number 1, you're offering professional development the people are actually looking for, and it doesn't cost anything. And 2, it makes the people who are doing the mentoring or delivering the training feel very, very good about themselves, because who doesn't want to tell people how they got to where they are today, kind of thing. And then finally, target the candidates that you're looking for. Career growth is most important to junior and intermediate level candidates. So when you're advertising those types of roles, it's especially important to emphasize career growth opportunities. Okay, the next one about the mismatch, so going through these 5 elements. Next one we have is about culture. So as mentioned before, people rate company culture as more important for staying in a job than for evaluating an offer. So it is good to think about that as a retention tool initially. What's more, when people say that they're unhappy in their current role, they list company culture as the number 1 reason why they would consider leaving. And that makes sense. If it's not a good cultural fit, then it's not going to make them happy, which will obviously motivate them to leave. And just so we're not getting confused here, so when we're talking about career progression, that comes in as the biggest pull factor, i.e. how can I attract somebody to my organization? You should be talking about career progression. Company culture is the one that you need to sort out when it comes to retention. How can I keep people in my organization? Company culture becomes more important. So culture should be top of mind when it comes to retention, but only 22% of employers recognize culture as a retention challenge. Now that actually isn't that surprising. It's hard to criticize your own culture, but I would suggest that maybe the mismatch here is about the fact that leaders in the organization typically enjoy the company culture. They're very proud of the company culture, and that's probably because they created it in the first place or really heavily influenced it. So maybe what the boss likes isn't necessarily what the employee is looking for when it comes to culture. And on that topic, when people say that they're looking for a good company culture, what is that? What does that actually mean? And as an organization, what can you do to work towards achieving that? So it's probably more simple than you might think. Across all demographics, employees say that the most important aspects of culture are open communication, strong leadership, and work-life balance, and that's pretty much it. So it's not about pool tables or beer fridges, or if you as the leader personally enjoy working here. Employees want to work somewhere where there's clear and open communication. They want strong company leadership that they can trust, and they want an employer that respects and recognizes their efforts and their needs in their personal lives and are willing to support that. Obviously, some of these aspects are difficult things to achieve than some of maybe the flashier ideas you could think, but employees won't be influenced by superficial things like small perks or toys in the office if some of the more core elements aren't being addressed. And then finally, I would suggest surveying your employees about your culture. You might think that you know what they think, but you won't really know for sure unless you ask. And it's rare that people do these surveys and they don't end up surprised with at least some of the findings. All right, so this onto the fifth mismatch, and this is about communication. The last few slides, or the four previous points, are really about what you do, what you offer, and what your work environment is like. But I'm just going to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about how you communicate with the target audience, what you're promoting, and think about who's listening. So just to put it into context here, you could be the best employer in the world and offer all the right things, you could have incredible career paths, but if you don't actually tell people about it, then you'll obviously struggle to attract the right people. A lot of employers say that promoting their company culture to attract talent, they say that it's the #1 thing that they promote to attract people. Come here because we've got a great company culture. But I'm not sure the companies are actually getting this right, and I'll try and explain that. Managers tell us that the biggest issue when they're trying to recruit is they just don't get a high volume enough of good quality applications. And 1/3, just under a third, 32% of HR leaders say that a lack of candidate network is a major recruitment challenge. And just under half of HR professionals say the target candidates don't know who their company is or aren't familiar with their employer brand. Now, final one, everyone says, well, I say everyone, 65% say, I should have said earlier, the #1 point on here, employers are attracting candidates is by promoting company culture, but then you look at the last statistic, 65% of employers don't actually have a defined value proposition to put in front of potential employees. So they haven't actually defined messaging about why would a person actually want to work here. That means potentially that you could be promoting company culture or thinking that you are, but simultaneously that message could be and probably is inconsistent and mixed across the HR department, the hiring managers, the recruiters that you're using, the ads that you're posting. There probably isn't a clean message as to, well, what is the company culture and why would somebody actually want to work here? So what can you do to combat this mismatch? Again, we've got 3 key things. First of all, I would encourage every employer, no matter how small, to just take some time out to define your employer value proposition. It sounds a lot more convoluted than it actually is. It's really just trying to agree upon why should someone want to work for you? What do your current employees like? What sets you apart? And you think you know, but if you get a group of you around the table and talk about it, maybe you've got agreement, maybe you don't, but it is very important to try and come up with a universal agreement, say, right, this is what makes us unique, this is what will attract candidates to come and work here. And I think it's a great exercise to do, very productive. I think as soon as people do it, they start to make progress. Second, identify the target candidates, and you've got to start building your network. So using social media tools, job boards, associations, advertising. The point here is it's not about trying to generate candidates to fill today's vacancies, it's about building a network that might be able to fill tomorrow's vacancies or the vacancies in the future. And then finally, how do you create engagement with a bigger network? But you need some form of a content strategy, probably coming out of your HR department, could be the marketing department. We're trying to share relevant, timely information, and it's the best way to engage those candidates that you have identified so that over time they become to know who you are and what you do. And then when it comes to hire, you've already got a pool of qualified candidates who know about you and hopefully are going to be interested in working for you. Okay, so we're pretty much done. I'm just going to do a very fast summary, a couple of recommendations, and then we can take questions if we have any. So a quick summary of what we talked about today. Number one, confidence in business activity levels are increasing, hiring is increasing, but compensation changes are remaining pretty nominal. Number two, candidates are feeling very confident about the job market and the fear of moving is gone. Number three, compensation matters, but it really is outweighed by career progression and company culture. And we believe that employers are missing out on some key attraction and retention tactics that they could use. Number four, if you're not communicating about your programs, whether that's internally or externally, then you're probably missing out on an opportunity. And then I've got four things you could do to better align with what your employees and target candidates want. So number one, compare your team or organization salaries to market rate. Start by talking to your recruitment consultant or reading the salary guide or wherever you get the information from, but you should do a comparison. Number two, start a conversation with your employees about what they like, what they don't like, so you can target areas that you could improve upon. Number three, grow your network, as I've just said, so joining social media groups, connecting with associations, developing a content plan. And finally, find and engage with the target candidates instead of waiting for them to come to you because they probably won't. Okay, so that's the webinar. I started 5 minutes late, so I think I've kind of completed it within the time, although we've kind of overshot a little bit. So we have time to take some questions, and while we're getting those questions together, I will just highlight a couple of things for you here. Number one, the salary guide is not actually officially being released until January. We're releasing it early January. But for people who have attended the webinar, all you need to do is drop me an email there, or you can contact your Hayes recruitment consultant directly. I would say drop the email to rowan@hayes.com. We have a list of everybody who's attended today, and then we will get you a copy in advance of it being released. You can go to hayes.ca/resources to look at all the previous reports. There's many reports on there now from the years of research and surveys we've been conducting, so there's always some interesting stuff. Okay, so I'll get on with it. I can see some questions here. In regards to the skill shortage, what skills are employers saying there is a shortage of? Like, honestly, it depends on the industry. The ones that we can see where there's the biggest shortage, I'd pick out two actually. The construction industry, from general contractors to architects to engineers, is suffering from a skill shortage. It has for years. It's not doing a good job at bringing people in at the apprentice level and bringing them through the system. And then the other one is anything to do with IT. There is a skill shortage now. It's getting worse as time goes on. New technologies keep getting introduced, and it is only going to get worse. Technology is not going away, obviously. So I know that's a general answer, but that's probably the best I could do with not boring everybody to tears. I'll move on to the next one. When you say candidates are willing to move, does this also mean geographies to other cities for the right opportunity? I would say so, yes. Like, for the right opportunity, we have found that people will take a cut in salary. They would take a reduction in vacation time, so very emotive things. Typically, they don't want to take a step down. I would say almost always they don't want to take a step down, so that's not that surprising. Whether they will move geographies or not, I think it's honestly a personal thing. But if the right opportunity comes up for someone, we have found if it's the right opportunity, they're attracted to the company culture, the career progression is right, it's a significant improvement in salary, it's rare that somebody wouldn't entertain it, and there might be reasons why they just cannot move. So family commitments or a situation, it might say we can't move. But I would not rule it out. So I would say potentially yes. Okay, is there any other ones? Just give it another second. One other one here, they're saying, I think it's from a HR department, interesting to see the increase in temps. We have more contractors currently in our organization. Any tips for making sure we have a consistent onboarding process across teams? That is a good question, and that is actually connecting to some of the things we've seen where companies are struggling to keep track of their use of temps and contractors. And when it comes to compliance, is the person criminal background check? Have we interviewed the candidate? Do we have references on file? Have they signed the correct documentation? What's our relationship with that temp? Are we the employer? Is it a recruitment agency? What if it's an independent contractor? Companies are using temps and contractors more and more, which is great. I think it's the right thing to do, and obviously we supply people like that. But you need a mechanism for visibility, and partly that might just be communication and get HR, procurement, finance all together and agree this is how we do things. But that can leak and it's difficult to maintain. So I think if you're a high volume user, you need some kind of a system to track them. There's technologies that you can use. Hayes has its own proprietary system to do that. Yeah, so if you specifically need advice on that, if you're trying to solve something, let me know and I'll try and help. Do you have any more information on the employee/candidate respondents? For example, how many of the respondents were new grads, intermediate level and senior level candidates? We do have lots more information about that. There was a particular report we just did in was it October, September, October, called What People Want. And we do have that breakdown on how different levels of candidates value different things. I can tell you that more junior and intermediate people are extremely interested in career progression, which isn't really that surprising. I can also tell you that the whole concept about younger generations not being particularly interested in their careers and advancement and wanting to take responsibility is just not true. They absolutely do, and we have evidence to prove that. And also just working, you can see that people want to progress as much as any previous generation did as well. But I would say if you haven't looked at that report, go onto the site, hayes.ca/resources, and you're looking for what people want, and you might get some good insights in there. Another question, and maybe we'll stop. How to overcome biases from talent acquisition managers, recruiters, when they sort out applications? Yeah, well, that is an excellent question. I wish somebody could come up with the answer to that. I think what happens, yes, yeah, everybody has a bias. I remember seeing a statistic once that when a recruiter is looking at a resume to screen it in or out, typically they're looking at that resume for about 10 to 15 seconds. And I think what happens is people are trying to identify the things that have worked for them before. So if they see somebody coming from a certain background or they've worked for a certain kind of organization, if that's on the resume, then we're interested. And if it isn't, then we're not. And part of it just becomes, it's from an efficiency point of view. They're trying to get through it. What we've done a lot of actually is closing the gap between the hiring manager and the recruiter, where they'll work together. So when we get a brief from a client as to what we're looking for, we will go and search, but we will never submit resumes for a review. The way we do it is we'll meet face to face, or we'll arrange a phone call, and we'll actually submit the resumes live. We call it a live presentation of resumes. We'll talk about the candidates as we're handing them over. So we don't just dump 5 resumes in front of a client. We'll talk through each individual one, talk about when we interviewed them, how they came across, what seemed to be important to them. We can answer questions as we go along, and it's an awesome two-way communication to overcome biases, I would say, but also to get a better understanding of really what the person or the client is actually looking for. I think that partnership between the two is the essential thing. It can't be you go and search and then submit me resumes, I'll review them and tell you what I think. that's not getting value from what the service could potentially be. And so I would suggest trying to close that gap between the recruiter and the hiring manager, perhaps, and just openly talk about the candidates. Work from home and flexible working hours is not in the top 5, but they're offered by many employers. Yes, it's question. The question is, work from home and flexible working hours isn't offered, is not on the top 5 from candidates, but they are offered by many employers. Yeah, if I understand the question there, yes, I think that there's, for some reason, work from home and flexible work hours seems to have become the most popular benefit to introduce, but it's not the most important thing that people are actually looking for. Maybe it's a simpler thing to try and introduce than more of an investment in people and investment in development, because it's an easier thing to understand and it's more tangible. You say, right, we now have flexible hours, so that's that solved. So yeah, that has come up in the past. It seems to be more obvious every year that goes through that's not the thing that's going to have the biggest impact on retention and attraction. So I've just got a message there that I think all the questions that we've had, we're coming up to the 1 hour mark. So thank you very much for dialing in. I hope that was useful for you. Have an excellent rest of the day, and good luck to everybody for your business goals in 2018.